Welcome back to Movies TV Mad and welcome to Saturday's edition of the DCU Daily. So, did James Gunn's career survive Superman? Months and months ago I said to you, Superman is a career-destroying character. Basically, Superman destroyed Bryan Singer's career. Superman destroyed Zack Snyder's career, ultimately, because he's a difficult character to do. Now, obviously, you've got to do things right. You can't put yourself as a target. I mean, Zack Snyder did something so contemporary and unique that he made himself a target, which I love, but not everyone loved what he did. But how many cinematic movies has Zack Snyder made since he worked on Superman? Whether that's the Snyder Cut, Batman vs. Superman, or Man of Steel. This character destroys careers. And Bryan Singer's career was never the same again after Superman Returns. And that's a factual statement. So has James Gunn making a Superman movie destroyed his career? No. James Gunn is still standing. It's a very big surprise, isn't it, that he's going to survive making a Superman movie. Maybe the James Gunnerisms in this movie, maybe making it a James Gunn movie, maybe making it about a dog, a super alien dog as well, helped. Maybe those things helped James Gunn and his career. Because the reality is, whether I like this film or not, whether you like this film or not, or whether you deem this as a flop or a success, ultimately, the box office was strong in the United States of America. Now, personally, I don't think it's strong enough. I think a Superman movie should be doing more. But considering all the hatred for Gunn, considering the divide about how Snyder and Cavill were treated and the Snyderverse stands, ultimately, the numbers in America stayed strong. American audiences wanted to watch this film. Now, not as many. The box office isn't as high as I think a film about Superman should be. But ultimately, there were still strong numbers. It doesn't matter what you think of Gunn. It doesn't matter what you think, right? It doesn't matter if you've got hate in your heart for Gunn or what they're doing with DC Studios. The domestic numbers are still solid and are still strong. And the reality is, if the numbers internationally were as strong as the domestic numbers, this film could have hit $1 billion or near enough. So domestically, people have enjoyed watching this movie. But not only that, they've been going back to rewatch it. And I said, for me, this film didn't have rewatchability, but clearly, a dominant factor of the American movie-going audience actually have loved and enjoyed this film. So James Gunn, and I know this is not going to be a popular video, but James Gunn has survived Superman. James Gunn has managed to do something that other directors in the modern day have failed to do. When you think about Dick Donner's achievement, that because Superman 78 is that movie on top of the hill, right? Zack Snyder describes Superman as a character as that god on top of the hill, untouchable. And Donner's Superman 78 has become that movie about that god on top of the hill that is also untouchable. And you think about it, the pressure of making a Superman movie, and for him to have to bring in some amazing people, visually, to make that movie work. And it still works today. That's amazing. His achievement is freaking amazing. He pulled it off. And ever since then, everyone else has struggled. Because what happens is when you make a really good movie, people say, we want that one. We want you to make it like that. But if I'm going to make it like that one, what's the point of making it? Why don't we just watch that one? That's my problem with remakes today. Why do I need fucking Jamie Lee Curtis to play Jessica Fletcher? There's only one Jessica fucking Fletcher. Angela Lansbury, Dame Angela Lansbury. I watched Murder, She Wrote as a kid. Jamie Lee Curtis. Why are you playing that Don, that icon? Oh my God, sorry. I diverged onto something else, right? But that's what I'm saying with these reboots. Keep on making Superman movies. You can't touch Superman 78. You're always going to be fighting against Dick Donner's ghost. And it's not easy. But this is what's kind of amazing and interesting. I've criticised James Gunn, I've criticised this Superman movie. I stand by everything I have said. But I still like certain elements of his movie. And there's no question about that. And I was very clear about that from the beginning, just so I don't get any callback about what I'm saying today. But here's the reality. Supergirl is going to be released. Peacemaker 2 is coming. His vision for this franchise is still happening. And he's got people all over Hollywood publicly saying that Superman is a success. This movie is now deemed as a success. It should be there or thereabouts 500 million globally by the time this box office weekend is done. So, you know, it's not brilliant. I'm not saying it's brilliant. And, you know, when you spend the kind of money, you know, 225 million on a movie and then obviously the marketing, whatever it is, right? It's hardly, you know, it's hardly a great return. But one thing that's not going to happen with this movie, they're not going to lose money. Because if you spend 325 million or whatever it is, and you make over 500 million, it could be 550, 600, you've still made. If you want to argue that they haven't made any profit, they're still getting their money back. But obviously, it's a film industry. They make movies to make money. But this film, as I said yesterday, could actually be a really good launch pad for James Gunn, DC Studios and the DCU. Again, it doesn't matter what I personally feel about James Gunn as a writer-director. It doesn't matter how I feel about what he did with Superman. I don't like the costume. I don't like the way Superman flies. Sometimes he flies okay, by the way. It's not all bad. And there's certain things I don't like about this movie. It's not a perfect storm for me. But there's no question about it. The Gunn, the good Gunn stuff is in here. And that's what you can take away from it. That's what Gunn does. People like what Gunn does, right? I mean, and the only reason the Suicide Squad was a flop, because of COVID. We know that. There's no point trying to sell another story. But, personally, I wouldn't have got this guy to make a Superman film. A lot of the film is not my cup of tea. But clearly, when you look at the domestic box office, it did okay. And let me be clear, a Superman film shouldn't be doing okay. A Superman film should be opening up to 500 million globally, and should end up around $800 to $1 billion, which this film's not going to do, by the way. And neither is Fantastic Four, as we discussed yesterday. Another bland, generic comic book movie that could spell the end of the interconnected comic book movie franchise. Or will it? Will James Gunn make a success of this? After all the talk and all the discussions and all the calamities, even before anything was released for the DCU, because he does talk too much and he has caused problems for himself. But the industry have deemed this Superman movie as a success. There's many people who believe, pundits, that this movie is a great movie and it's a success, that the money they're bringing in is good enough. So it's all very, very interesting. I mean, it is a generic comic book movie, as is Fantastic Four, and as is the other two movies that the MCU released this year as well. But that's what happened. You see, the tone wars, the comic book movie tone wars we were having when the DCEU Snyderverse was about, and the MCU Phase 2 and Phase 3 were about, and they were whipping the Snyderverse in the box office, right? It was the tone wars. Because one thing you should never do, it's nice to listen to your audience's criticisms, critiques of you, as a creative, as someone who makes something. But when they tell you, you must make your stuff like their stuff, you absolutely fucking ignore them. One of the biggest things, the problems that WB did, was Al Snyder because he refused to make MCU movies. Because Zack's movies were something different, right? Which was a good thing. But they weren't making the money these people wanted. And that's the problem. That is ultimately the problem. The horrible toxic discussions around Zack Snyder, around his films, were problematic for WB. And as a company, I understand where they were coming from at the time. But the DCEU, the Snyderverse, was a great alternative to the MCU. Because I don't think if the DCEU, even if Snyder had agreed to make DCEU movies like Marvel movies, I don't think that would have solved the issue. I don't think suddenly that DC would have made more money. Look, it's all about decisions. Because Goyer came up with an idea for a Superman movie, Man of Steel, and because he and Nolan had delivered 3 amazing, profitable, more than profitable, Batman movies, the Dark Knight trilogy, WB thought, oh yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Well, they went the same kind of way they did with their Batman trilogy with a Superman movie. And you can't do that. Superman's a different character. What you need to do to be successful with DC, and I don't necessarily think that Gunn has done this, but you need someone with the attitude of Bruce Timm. Someone who took the DCAU, the DC Animated Universe, and took the comics and put them on the animated screen. And it kind of reminds you of the comics. That's the kind of live action, successful universe I hoped that James Gunn may give us. Because that's what you should be doing. That Bruce Timm kind of, mentality. I was shocked that Bruce Timm wasn't asked to co-lead DC Studios with someone else. Maybe someone like Dan Lin. Because Bruce Timm has done it. Now, Bruce Timm's animated movies and animated television are not all perfect. I mean, a lot of those movies are kind of very fillery, aren't they? But they worked. People were excited about them. It was a very interesting time. I don't know if they're still going to make loads of them. I think there's a Batman one out at the moment. But what Bruce Timm did with the DCAU was amazing. And I think it was an obvious recruitment to bring in Bruce Timm to run DC Studios. Because at the very least, he would have had that comic book aesthetic. I mean, when you look at Batman, the animated series, fucking amazing. And I think they missed a trick there. But when you've got someone like Zaslav, even if you bring in someone like Bruce Timm, it doesn't really matter because Zaslav is there. And I'm sure Gunn and Zaslav have argued because Gunn doesn't like to be told what to do. No question that Zaslav wanted 30 minutes cut out of his movie. And I'm sure Gunn argued. But in the end, Gunn thought, I want to keep this job. It's a great job. I can mould a DC universe. I don't want to lose that opportunity. And I can understand that. But what is interesting is how Gunn has survived Superman. As I say, he's the first director to do so. Because it's not like Zack Snyder didn't stick to his principles. And it's not like James Gunn is any more a Superman fan than Zack Snyder is. They had a perception of what Superman should be in the modern day, and they did it. And the difference with Dick Donner was, right, we're going to embrace who Superman actually is. Snyder, Goyer, and Nolan said, we need to make a modern day, contemporary post-9/11 Superman. A very dangerous decision, by the way, but making 670 million is still pretty good, right? Out of doing that. And Gunn's going to do whatever he's going to do. But the DCU has launched. The DCU will continue, from as far as we know right now, which means he has survived Superman. Now, all of a sudden, if Gunn was to quit, or Saffron, I believe Saffron may step away. Let's see if there'll be a casualty to all of this. But if no one is sacked, and no movies are shelved, or even the streaming shows, that means Gunn and DC Studios have survived Superman. And that, my friends, is a great achievement in itself, because it's something no film director has been able to do since Dick Donner. The only people really to succeed with Superman live action are people who have brought Superman to the television. The showrunners of Superboy, the Lois and Clark show, You know, when you think about Smallville, such a pioneering show, groundbreaking, amazing, moulded a new generation of Superman fans. Superman and Lois, another original take at Superman. It worked. They worked. People embraced them. But no one has survived Superman since Dick Donner. Well, somebody has, and that's James Gunn. And as I say, that, my friends, is an achievement in itself.